Ho, 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 everyone. Merry Christmas. Oh boy. From all of us here at Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing. It's our Christmas episode, and we're going to talk about
Yay.
death of children. Dun 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 dun. Hey, the Fawn Pod, the Fawn Cast. This is Cody. I'm here with Brett and Justin. All three of us are hanging on by a health thread, it sounds like at the moment, but together
Mm.
we are almost a person. So we are going to get through this. It's going to
The
be
saddest Voltron ever.
awesome. Yeah. It's three members of Voltron whose lines combine to just make one single lion. Really a letdown. All the animation really let down, but or if the Power Rangers is actually good. All right.
Oh,
Let's get into this here. Well, it is the holiday time here, so I guess let's just jump around the room and say we're recording this obviously not on Christmas morning, so our listeners aren't confused out there. But
mm.
Brett, what do you got coming up? Anything in the next week or two for the family or holidays, or anything you're planning to do, or what you've been up to recently?
I don't. We don't really have anything like we're not traveling anything for Christmas or anything like that. We probably will be spending a bit of time around family. There's some cough coming already.
One,
I don't know.
nothing wrong with me.
Um, but yeah, I don't think there's anything like special plan necessarily. I think it's just hanging around the house and just spend time with family as much as we can, and that's about it. But I did want to throw out. I feel like I have to talk about Fortnite for a little while because
Oh,
this game, it's this little humble game that started with this like resource gathering tower defense game and then branched out into this mega popular battle royale mode. Um, I've been playing it a lot the last week or so, mainly because they went out and and they spent a whole bunch of their time like they put all of their developers onto like other stuff, other bits of they were like developing things other than the game, which for a while I think a lot of people were like really frustrated because the game itself was like not what it used to be. Like it was like at least seemed really lazy. Well, on December 7th, they dropped a brand new game mode. It is finally the Lego crossover came into Fortnite,
oh wow.
and it's an entirely new mode that is probably the thing that most people would liken it to is Minecraft, but it's actually more like Valheim if you're familiar with that game. It's essentially it's a survival mode where you're like gathering resources and like crafting things and building a base and then going out adventuring and like defeating monsters and stuff.
Hmm.
It is like really pretty cool, and I've been playing that a lot. I actually even went so far as to like download Fortnite on my phone, so I'm
Wow.
just sitting on the couch. I can just play this Lego mode now. But and that mode alone was pulling in over 2 million concurrent players for multiple days in a row. It is just astounding. It was like double the battle royale mode in player count for a
Wow.
while, but
Holy crap.
They're all in the same battle royale.
yeah.
2 million players.
But it doesn't stop there because the very next day
Oh,
they released, actually no, I remember which one came first. The racing mode came second, I believe. They developed an entire racing mode, which is not if you're familiar with Fortnite's creative maps, they're like it was allow you to like basically make stuff in like within the Fortnite boundaries. And but this is like a completely different thing. It's like it's actually a well constructed racing game. It's not like the best racing game ever made, but it certainly is fun to play. It has like elements from Rocket League in it, just the way you can like move your car around.
wow.
And I played some of that, and that's pretty good too. But it doesn't stop there because the day after that, they dropped a mode that is essentially Rock Band. It's a rhythm game that and you can choose between lead guitar, bass, drums, and vocals as like the four different rhythms to play. And they have like a bunch of like mainstream and kind of retro songs currently built into it.
Wow.
And even that mode is like really well done too. It's astounding. Like to the point where I like felt like I I needed to like mention it because they now have 5 distinct game modes within Fortnite that are all very unique and have like their own, like if you there's like something that basically appeals to everybody, except like they don't have like sports at this point. It's like the only thing they don't have, it feels like.
Isn't
But
killing players a sport? I mean,
that's cool. Yeah, it's
that's
true.
that's North Korea.
Depends how you feel about
Oh,
sports. Um, but yeah, it's just crazy that they're all pretty darn well done. So just felt like I had to throw that out there. That's where I've been spending a lot of my time lately.
Nice.
nice.
How about you,
Um,
Justin?
Well, speaking of well done games,
He's been
I
developing Fortnite behind the scenes for the past 4 years.
yeah, how do you think I actually have a house?
Yeah.
But no, I've been I'm at the final battle in Alan Wake 2 right now, and it's a great game, but I really question this final confrontation because I'll get to what I'm doing in over the holidays in a second here, but I'm just building off the tangent. So throughout most of the game, you're fighting at most 2, 3 enemies at a time, generally. This last thing, you're being swarmed by close to a dozen at any given moment, and I don't think the combat engine is really designed to effectively let you handle that. So I've been stuck on this for a bit, and still a fantastic game, but oof, man, it's a very, very much a tonal shift at the end, and I have some questions about why they decided to go that particular route for the final confrontation, because at this point, it's getting more frustrating than anything. But if you like horror, if you like well-written stories, I would still recommend it. Great game. And as for what I'm doing for the holidays, in less than a week, I'm going to be heading downstate to see my family for the first time in a couple of years, thanks
my.
COVID. I've seen a few of them, here and there, but this will be the first time in at least 2 years that I've gotten a chance to actually get back together with all of them. And it'll be nice. Even though they're going to have just as much snow down there as we have up here, which, believe it or not, I know both of you spent time up here. That is 0. It's been 40 to 50 degrees up where I am, and just for the listeners at home, I'm closer to the North Pole than I am to the equator. So that is just weird to me. None of this really feels like the holidays. Like we haven't even bothered putting our fake tree up because it doesn't feel like Christmas is just a few days, like a week or so away. So been trying to get into the Christmas spirit as much as I can, but it doesn't really. I don't know, the weather in the world around me hasn't really helped with that. I will say this time around for the podcast, I'm glad we can't pin the morbid Christmas subject on me. Yeah, take that, Silent Night, Deadly Night retrospective.
Yes, that's right.
But I am looking forward to getting into this case. But yeah, what about you, Cody? What are your plans for this season?
Yeah, I'll just say a couple things quick. My parents are coming down here for Christmas this year, and I'm trying to remember. They might have made it down for Christmas once before. I can't remember. We used to go to their house, and then COVID hit, and nobody traveled. And I don't know if we did that for 1 year or 2. And then I know last year they came after Christmas, but I'm trying to remember 2021 what the story was that year, and I just can't place in my head what happened that year as far as who traveled where when. But so looking forward to that. Otherwise, nothing else. So it's just going to be purely a wake up in our house with our kids and my parents. That's going to be nice. Karen's aunt was also invited to come join us, but she has a lot of health issues. She's chronically having to have surgery and some other things. So I think this time her legs are not good enough. She said her knees, I believe, to get down here, or up here, I guess, because she's in Florida. So it'll just be us, but that'll be really nice. Looking forward to those just kind of downtime days and sitting around playing games or whatever, and just spending some time with the family. And speaking of some games here, we did get a chance this weekend. Yesterday we played 3 games total, but only 2 different ones with the kids. We did Boston has been asking to play Monopoly for 3 weeks, so we finally acquiesced and played a
Oh.
game of Monopoly that took about 3.5 hours, I would say. Um, we were deadlocked property-wise. Nobody wanted to trade, and everybody had like one of everything. So
Wait a minute,
finally,
that never happens.
yeah, right.
No, that's crazy talk.
So finally, I initiated trades as per usual in the family, and everybody kind of sorted out with some monopolies. And um, through some real bad luck, Cameron got knocked out first, um, and then Karen got knocked out second finally. But she just like jumped from railroad to railroad for like 20 minutes. It was disgusting how much she was just not hitting stuff. But she finally did lose, and then I was down to like basically the green ones with like a house each is all I had left at that point because I sold everything. So I just actually threw in the towel and we declared Boston the winner. So we played that, and then last evening we played two what are they called? Episodes, I believe, of the game My City, which I may have mentioned on the podcast before, but if you haven't played My City and you or your spouse and or if you have kids that are old enough to play a legacy game, it is really good. I really like it. You basically build a new city every single game. There's 24 episodes, which are split into 8 scenarios. The rules change every scenario. You get some new pieces that come down, but it's kind of like almost SimCity in the woods in some ways, but there's different ways you score points, and they alter that a little bit every game as well. And then you modify your board with stickers as you go through as well. We've been playing with the kids, and we just finished episode 11 and 12 last night, so we're halfway through that. And I think Dave said he played it with just his wife, and he said it was really good for 2 players as well. They really enjoyed it. But the game is really well made in that if you're better at like spatial relation problems, you'll usually win as long as you get a little bit of luck and do a good job planning, but the game will mitigate that almost every time, like going forward. So now, like, I'm way ahead in the game overall, but now Boston has like his 4 squares are like 6 of his squares on the board, and like once you cover your forest, you get like a bonus, and so he's going to win that every game now to catch up, and so there's some little things that kind of balance it out, but really curious. Our next envelope has like a big meaty feel to it. So I know we're getting some new actual cardboard pieces, like new buildings and stuff we're going to get. But it kind of goes through a progressive evolution too. So it's kind of fun. And then last 2 things, I know I'm going long here. I'll just quickly say this. I did finally finish up GoldenEye 007. So that podcast is coming out soon. It is going to be an award for anybody who can watch and listen to the whole episode, because it took me about 2 hours and 15 minutes to beat the final 4 stages. And the last stage is complete bullshit. Not spoiling anything for anybody here, but you have to fall through a hole at the bottom of the antenna cradle to fight Trevelyan, and it took me like 10 times of falling to even land on the fucking platform.
Oh no.
And then I shot him a few times, and the one time I actually managed to shoot him, because it's like you drop and don't know what side of you he's on, so you have to like fire quick and hit him. And then he says a little dialogue. This was the best part. He says a little dialogue as he's dying and about to fall off. And the first time I beat him, finally, a random henchman had also dropped in behind me and shot me, and I also flew off the platform. And even though he was dead in the game and falling, I also fell, and they showed nobody on the platform in that one. I was like, oh my God. It took a long time. So that one was terrible. The jungle stage was terrible. It was terrible. But some good ratings at the end of that one. But anyway, and then last thing here I'll just mention is I started doing something which I haven't done since freshman year of college, which is learn a second language.
Ooh.
So Japanese.
Nice.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So I finally joined the Billions Around the World with Duolingo and started doing some Japanese lessons to try to have any idea what the hell I'm doing when we go to Japan next year. So
Oh, well, that'd be good. Yeah, that's cool.
yeah, so
Nice.
technically we're all learning it, but some of us are going quicker than others, so we'll see. But anyway, yeah, so that's a lot, but there's that. All right, well, let's talk about Christmas tragedy, everybody. Here we go.
Have you ever wished that
today,
half your family would disappear overnight on Christmas Eve?
I bet most listeners have, actually.
Are we pitching a new Home Alone movie?
At some point, sort of. Sort of. But we are talking tonight about a case from 1945, and I don't know what the official name of this is going to be called. Let's call it the disappearance of the Sodder Children, Sodder, if you're trying to look this up out there. But we're going to kind of lay this out like an onion today and start with kind of the accepted facts, then kind of talk about what probably happened, and then kind of get into the more bizarre things and some awesome theories, which may or may not include aliens at the end of all of this. It doesn't on my end, but that doesn't mean it won't. We'll see. All right. So the extremely short version of this case is that we have a couple here, George, and the lady's name I heard pronounced different ways, different places here. So I've heard Jeannie, I've heard Jenny, and I feel like there was even a third one I heard in there. Ginny, I think I heard Ginny also. Ginny, Jenny, and Jenny. I don't know. It's a tongue twister. Anyway, Jennie is the spelling I've seen most places here. But it's these two people, and they have nine. Yes, that's nine. Not nine as in no, nine as in less than 10 children here. Actually, they have a 10th though, right?
They have 10 as far as
they do have a 10, but one is not at the house at this fateful night. And this is a kid named Joseph, who's 21, who was coming back from the army and was supposed to be there for Christmas, but he didn't get there in time. Or did he? Dun, dun, dun. All right. The very short version of what happened here is the mother/wife, Jeannie, woke up at about 1:30, and even that time is in question here, we'll talk about, and basically saw smoke in the house, figured out that it was coming from downstairs. This happened to them on basically Christmas Eve, 1945, which is why Justin thought this would be a great tragedy to talk about on Christmas. So there's that. They had a 2-story house that burned to the ground, and no one put this fire out. As a matter of fact, the fire department in any capacity didn't arrive for around 6 or 7 hours. We have basically, once they get out of the house, there's the mom and the dad, and they have 4 kids next to them, and they don't realize at first, but then they quickly take inventory, I guess, as you will, when you realize half your baseball team is missing here. And we have 5 kids that are not there. So these are, interestingly, in a way, the middle 5, because we had the oldest 3 that made it out, and we had the youngest one that made it out. And then we are missing Maurice, who's 14, Martha, who's 12, Louis, who's 10, Jenny Jr., whatever that would be for a lady, Junior, I don't know, who's 8, and Betty, who's 5. Okay. And so when all is said and done, there's no sign of these kids in the burned down house. We'll talk about some of the stuff that they tried to do to search through that later on, but essentially the kids have more or less disappeared. There's no proof that they were burned inside the house. There's no proof that they ever escaped the house, but there's really just no sign of them, period. So the fire's cause officially listed here in the police report in West Virginia where this takes place is undetermined. Was it intentional? Was it accidental? Was this electrical? Was it something else? It's just labeled undetermined officially. And then that essentially this would it be the state who officially declares the children dead? Is that the state? Would that be the city? I'm not sure how the jurisdiction falls on that, to be quite frank.
One thing I came across that we can bring up later, but it seemed to be that the city determined that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There's a coroner's group.
Okay. So essentially one of the things I watched said their explanation was, since they had only been seen last in the house, and since no one had physically seen them leave the house, they assumed they were in the house, thus presumed dead in the fire. There are precisely 2 photos that exist from this event, both taken after the house had burned down, both of exceptionally poor quality. Makes your trooper who burst into flames on our spontaneous combustion episode look like the Patterson film, Bigfoot, compared to some of the other stuff that's out there. And they're not really a lot of help. All right, last thing I'll lay out here for fact, I guess, is this house was pretty standard probably at the time. We have a 2-story house, but the second story only occupies half of the square footage of the downstairs. So on the upstairs, we had essentially 2 large bedrooms. One was called the boys' bedroom. One was called the girls' bedroom. You can figure out who slept where. Downstairs, they had a living room and a parent's bedroom on half of the house. And then the other half of the house was a dining room and an office and a den. And those would have been, actually, no, those would be kitty corners. So either way, half of the house has 2 stories, half the house has 1 story, which you wouldn't think makes a big difference. But for some of the events that happen here, this actually could make a little bit of difference where the rooms are.
I'm going to step in for a second.
Yeah.
Since you found the blueprints for the place, I was hoping you could clarify something for me because, like I was talking to you guys about before we started recording, I've found a lot of inconsistencies in the research I tried to do on this. Was there an attic?
I never heard any mention of an attic in my stuff.
Okay, because
unless they're calling the second floor the attic.
See, that's the thing I'm not sure of, because
I guess could be.
Yeah, because some of the sources I read through said the children who didn't make it out were asleep on the second floor. Others said they never came down from the attic where their bedroom was. So it's a matter of it's one of many inconsistencies I've found here. So
maybe they're just referring to the second floor as the attic then.
Maybe, yeah,
which
is weird, but maybe that was the style of the time. I have no idea.
But. Yeah. So I'm trying to, I don't have the picture here in front of me now, but I'm just trying to think. The girls' bedroom was above the living room, and the boys' bedroom was above the dining room. Between the two was a staircase that came down to the first floor. The side of the house that had 1 floor, on one side would have been the mom and dad's bedroom, and then on the opposite side would have been the office/den. They had a front porch that would have touched the living room and the parents' bedroom side of the house, and they had a small back porch that would have came off of the dining room on the back. And I'm assuming, now that I think about that floor plan, the dining room must also include the kitchen, because otherwise there's no kitchen in the house. So that's that. Okay, so that is basically the layout. We lost 5 kids in a fire. End of story. We can all go to sleep. Oof, short case tonight.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
No. All right. So let's get into some things here that probably happened on that night. And I say probably because some of the stuff in this section is somewhat rooted in evidence. There's some testimonies in here, although a lot of testimony has wavered and changed from year to year, it seems like, with this case. And we'll save theories till a little bit later here. But we'll kind of run through some of the stuff here, the background of all of this, I guess, as well, in section 2. Anything else anybody else wants to put out there? We didn't even ask, I guess, as we traditionally would. Brett, you said you had heard of this case before?
Yeah, this was one that came across in a podcast that I'd listened to that has a bunch of like mysteries and things. Mm-hmm. I'd listened to this maybe 9 months ago.
Okay.
So I was familiar with it, but that was the first I'd heard about it at that point.
How about you, Justin? This one that was on your radar?
Not really, which surprises me because it seems rare that we do one of these that I've just not heard of at all before. But yeah, you were the one who suggested it, I think, and I read into it a little, and it seemed interesting and weird enough that I was really surprised that I hadn't come across it earlier.
Also curious, and you maybe would say this for later, but I'm just kind of going to jump to it now. Like, what did you look at in terms of some sources for today? If anybody remembers where they looked?
I've got a few of them bookmarked. Everything from the Smithsonian, who actually does come into play in the story, to Wikipedia as the first step, just to see what it was about. I've got an article from the Huffington Post, so I'm kind of like all over the place. And a lot of them had pretty much the same information, but with little, as I mentioned, inconsistencies, which really strikes me as bizarre. Considering this is a case from 80 years ago, you think that would have been enough time for people to get basic facts straight about this, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, primarily I just used that podcast that I listened to. They definitely sounded like they were very well informed, and so I didn't feel like I needed to go out too much farther than that.
Do you know what that's called, out of curiosity? Want to do a shout out?
Uh, what do they call themselves? It's not Unsolved Mysteries. It's the show, but
Yeah.
it's something very similar. What the heck is it?
Is it
I'll
the
have to
one that
find it
had
now.
the 3-part episode?
Yes.
Okay, I did
Yep.
I did see that when I was checking a little bit of stuff at the end here. Did anybody watch anything on this one out of curiosity?
I watched or listened to a few YouTube videos about it, but they seemed to all kind of be covering the same ground as the articles I found, so I didn't go too terribly deep with that because it all seemed to be sort of just the same stuff phrased slightly differently. So,
Yeah. I just looked at a couple articles as well. Huffington Post is one of the ones I looked at also, but I was trying to find a video to watch while I was grading papers today, and there's like a million videos on YouTube about this, of course, but I found one called The Sodder Family Case Study, and this is by I gather this might also be a podcast. I'm not sure if they're like us and also on YouTube these days, but they are called Mysterious West Virginia, and the guy focuses only on cases in the state of West Virginia. It was an hour and 7 minutes long and included photos. It was actually a pretty good one I ended up watching, but included photos of like all the original autopsies and evidence reports and things like that. And the guy mentions several times in there, and at the end he also does in the credits that he actually got most of his primary document copies from the daughter of one of the children. So
Hmm.
he actually had a pretty good source, I would say, as far as the stuff he had. But whether or not, you know, what anybody says on this is the truth, we will find out here. Okay, let's go to next here. What happened the night? And then we'll kind of go to the next day and keep it rolling from there. But the longer version of what we have here, and I'm focusing just on the Christmas Eve part of this. There's a whole backstory for some of these people, which may or may not play into some theories later on as well. But let's just stick with Christmas Eve for now. So, as it says in a couple of sources again that I looked at here, we have short version of this would be what 11 people in the house on the night. The dad, George, and his oldest son, John, and then also George Jr. They're 23 and 16. I'll just throw some ages out there. They worked in their dad's, George, his coal trucking business that he was operating at the time, which from the accounts I read was fairly profitable. I think he was up to 6 trucks, it said, on one of the payroll reports. So he was doing pretty well for
Hmm.
himself in the business. But they were really tired because they had been delivering coal, as you can imagine, around the holidays and cold times, like back when we used to get snow and stuff.
a lot
And
of fat children.
yeah, yeah, right. And they went to bed early that day. So we're gonna take those three out of the picture for right now. And then the mom, Jeannie, apparently took their youngest daughter, Sylvia, who was 3, to sleep with her in the parents' bed as well. So those 5 are kind of gone. All right, leaving us with 6 people left awake in the house at this point. Now, there was some emotional concerns here, I will say. So, one of the Brett, the podcast that you referred to, I listened to a little bit of the first episode and a little bit of the last episode, and the people on that, of which have fantastic speaking voices for radio, I will say, um, said that the family was in a pretty good mood that night because it was Christmas Eve, etc. And that really contrasts with what the video I watched said, because it said they were in pretty sour spirits that night because that other brother was supposed to be home from the war army to join them, and it was going to be the first time the whole family had been together in years, they said. And
Hmm.
so the fact that he couldn't make it apparently really made all of the younger kids sad that night. And there was some speculation here. The oldest girl in the family is Marion. She's 17. She's in the house, basically awake with the kids at this point. And she had gotten the young kids' toys to open up on Christmas Eve. And that in the video I watched was speculation that maybe it was to cheer the kids up because the brother hadn't made it home that night. That's why they let them open up presents Christmas Eve or whatever. Regardless, before all the parents went to sleep, they had told Maurice and Louis, the 2 oldest boys of the ones that are not asleep, to go feed the cows and the chickens before bed. Everything seemed fine at this point. At some point here, Marion falls asleep on the couch, where she's found later in our story. And then we have the 5 kids that are unaccounted for. Now, where and when they went to wherever they went, that is kind of the subject of the whole thing here. So let's go to, well, why don't we just do we'll just throw this all in there. We'll do kind of an abridged timeline in here. So I'm going to throw a few things in here from a little bit later in my notes as well. But the first thing here is apparently this mom is an extremely light sleeper. Let's just put that out there because it seems like this story is her waking up over and over and over. So this is pretty definitive that they received a phone call at 12 something on Christmas Eve, which technically would be Christmas morning, past midnight then. And Jenny woke up sometime after midnight. Said she didn't recognize the caller. The caller was asking for someone who wasn't there, which she thought was odd. Basically hung up the phone. It sounded like there was like some partying in the background, and this is kind of the assumption, I guess, that it was a wrong number. Maybe somebody was drunk at a party, had called and got their number by accident, etc. And I did have one of my notes said that person on the phone was later identified. I don't know if you guys had that on yours or not.
No, I didn't.
I only found. Go ahead.
Yeah, I did see that they were able to track her down. I don't know if I ever saw a name, but from what I read, the lady did say that it was a wrong number.
Okay, yeah, I got the name on this one doesn't really matter, but they apparently on something I looked at called her Mrs. Frank Harding.
Okay.
Was the source of the call. But anyway, Marion hangs up the phone. Not Marion, sorry, wrong person. Jeannie hangs up the phone, takes a little survey around the first floor, sees that Marion's asleep on the couch, and there's no other kids in the living room at this point, so she figures they're upstairs sleeping, everybody's good, she goes back to bed. So we should pause right there and just say our timeline here is sometime at 10 or just a little bit past. The boys went to bed, the mom went to bed after that, and the kids stayed up, but here by 12... I put 12XX on my timeline here, 12:30 maybe, when this phone call comes. The kids went somewhere in that amount of time, whether that was up to bed or other places. Again, it's kind of the key to the whole thing here. Jeannie goes back to bed, and then another event happens that she recalls. Around 12:30 to 12:40, she wakes up to something new, and this is something hitting the roof. They had a tin roof on the house, and this is why one of the reasons I was concerned about the like diagram of the house, because at first I was thinking it was a 2-story house. She wouldn't have actually heard anything hit the roof. And seeing the diagram now, her side of the house was only 1 story. So she did have a roof directly above her, which made more sense. So she said she heard something like, quote, a rubber ball, unquote, hit the roof. Quote, it rolled and hit the ground and landed with a thump, she said. Okay. She falls back to sleep again, and that's kind of the end of this weird rubber ball business, except, well, should we get to the except now, or should we? Yeah, let's get to the except now. Let's kind of keep this as linear as we can, I guess. Supposedly, at some point later, there is a bus driver on one thing I saw, passenger in a car, driver on a car. I saw a few different answers here. Yeah. Someone apparently testifies that they saw balls of fire, that was a quote, being thrown on the tar and wood roof, which we just said it was a tin roof, so that's also interesting.
Yeah.
Where the blaze had started. Now that would be not above the bedroom of the parents, but further down the other side of the house where we had the den or the office, as they called it. George, I'm not positive how and when this takes place, but according to, I think, the Huffington Post article, the dad identified it as a type of hand grenade.
Yeah.
Yes, there's
The fuck?
Yeah,
I think one of the sources I saw is that he was quoted as saying it was a napalm grenade of the type that was used in the war, which raises a ton of questions. But go on, Brett. You were going to say something.
Sure does.
Well, the only thing that I had on that was that later, after all the aftermath and everything, they found one like half buried in the ground, like near the rubble, and that's how they were able to identify the source.
So they actually did find a hand grenade half buried in the dirt.
Well, they
That's
found
what I
something
heard.
that looked like one.
What the hell?
A rubbery, greenish, lumpy thing that resembled a pineapple grenade, I think is how I saw it referred to once.
Mm.
Well, that definitely raises a lot of questions. Okay, keep it going here.
Mhm.
Let's see. Let's save that for a little bit later. Okay, so essentially, then she is waking up yet again, and then this is where we now have the smoke in the house, and this part was a little confusing to me. So she is on the first floor. She would exit out her room. She would have walked straight across the house to the next room, which would have been where the corner of the house had started on fire in the office. She said she saw a wall of flames in the office. The arson investigation later said that it started on the roof. But either way, the corner of the house where the fire was at supposedly was a pretty key corner architecturally in this house because it housed the telephone location, one of the circuit boxes of the house, and I forget, I have in my notes someplace else. Something else as well was in that corner. It was like three things were in that corner of the house, which, if a fire is going to naturally start somewhere, that makes sense, I guess. You got a lot of shit going on over there, probably more likely to spark and something's going to happen. I guess if you're thinking nefariously here, maybe somebody who knew the layout of the house could have targeted that area, but it doesn't really seem to make much sense, I don't think. Okay, so Jenny runs back into the bedroom, wakes up George, and then according to what I have here, she runs outside, and then the dad also runs outside. The oldest sister, who's sleeping in the living room, wakes up, instinctively runs to the parents' bedroom to grab the youngest daughter, and then also runs outside. So let's pause there. Does that correlate with what you guys have as far as those first few people?
I think so. I'm double checking like through one of the sources I have bookmarked right now.
The people, yes. The order, not as much, but yeah, those were like the first four out of the house.
Do you have that Marion was grabbing Sylvia while the mom was still in the house?
Yeah, basically, like that the
Okay.
mom went out of the bedroom and started trying to find kids, found Marion first. And
Okay.
that is a bit confusing because you would think that the mom would have just snatched up the baby from the room while
Thank
she was
you.
there.
Immediately, yeah.
But apparently she's told the daughter to go get the baby from the bedroom. That's the story that I have.
Okay, that makes more sense because at first I was like, these are terrible parents. And I know there's like the fight or flight thing, and my house has never burned down, thank God, but it just seems like you would grab the kid first. Also, so where's the dad? The dad just runs out? Like, the dad is a weird character at this moment in the story.
Yeah. I on one of the articles I've got here, basically it after Jenny wakes up, notices the smoke, runs downstairs, tells Marion to, take Sylvia outside, and then, quote, while she and George frantically tried to rescue the other children. That's one of the things I've seen. So it sounds like he was directly involved with trying to get them out, but
Okay.
things do get a bit muddled depending on which source you're reading here.
I mean, that would at least make more sense because in my narrative here, the dad he actually disappears according to like my linear narrative I have here, which is kind of interesting. He's just not mentioned anywhere, which is weird. Okay, so let's assume those four are out of the house if we can go so far as to do that even. So now theoretically we have, 7 more people left in the house here. The next thing I saw is the two oldest boys in the house, George and John, who are upstairs in the bedroom. There's a lot of inconsistencies here. It says in the documentary I think I watched, it said they basically yelled to the other kids to get downstairs, although there's a different version of this story where apparently John tried to shake the other children awake. And as they're interviewing these two brothers in particular, um, which I guess they would be the last people to see these kids upstairs because everybody else was downstairs.
Mhm.
So in the interviews over the years, either they've said different things or people have interpreted their words differently, but their stories do not match up, that's for sure, as far as what they did that day.
Yeah, one of the or a couple of the articles I read said that the initial account was that they ran up and tried to shake their siblings awake, and then they later changed their story at a different date to say that they only shouted up. So I mean, it both could be true in terms of what they said, just at different points. But again, that's not even entirely consistent either.
Yeah, my account that I heard was that they kind of like ran through the house, like yelling into bedrooms, like, "Wake up! You got to get out of here."
Okay. It does it seem odd to other people, or am I just putting too much faith in like how people would react in an emergency? Like it just seems weird to me that these people, all of them didn't testify. Like I grabbed a family member and like tried to carry slash yank them to the door to get out. Like it seems like the house started on fire and they were like, Lord of the Flies, this bitch.
There does seem a bit of that. Yeah, again, like kind of like you said that thankfully I haven't been in a situation like this, but yeah, I can't imagine even the just like, yeah, well, I mean these are kids too
Yeah.
by the accounts, but um
But the
like
parents, though.
yeah, the parents seemingly did very little and the kids did more of the work. And like all they did was just yelling into a room and not actually going in and physically trying to find somebody seems
Yeah.
off.
That's like Manos the Hands of Fate levels of negligence, where the daughter goes missing and the dad just opens the door, yells in, closes it without even like going in the room. It's like, well, she's not in there, yeah, that kind of thing. But yeah, the the account I've seen regarding the father, at least, in terms of like what he attempted to do, this is the most complete account I've been able to find. So he tried to save them, breaking a window to re-enter the house, cutting his arm in the process. Couldn't see anything through the smoke and the fire, which at that point had spread very very far. Blah, blah, blah. He took stock of who was actually outside at that point, and then there's stuff we can get to in a bit with the ladders and the trucks and everything. But it sounds like he initially tried to get back in after exiting, but the fire had somehow spread to an extent where he couldn't get back in by normal means at that point.
Yeah.
So he was at least actively trying to do stuff once he got his wits back about him, I guess.
Okay.
But initially just running out and not even grabbing another, a kid or anything just seems really bizarre to me.
Because you would expect the headline here to be like, dad dies in fire trying to like get last kids out of the house or something.
Right.
And maybe that's one of the reasons this case is more famous than a typical house fire story, but it does seem weird. I don't know if we have theories about that later or not, but we'll see. Okay, so the two older sons have kind of done something, it sounds like, to get the other kids up and out of the house at this point. And this part I was confused by too. So basically they get out of the house, and this is where Justin's kind of getting at here. And by the time they were out, the flames were so bad in the house that basically the stairway was inaccessible. Now they did mention in the documentary I watched that if you were to look at the house, the fire would start in the southeast corner of the house. And I don't know if it was actually meteorologically recorded this way or if this was someone's testimony, but someone had said reportedly the winds were blowing very strongly from the southeast that night. And so they tried to hypothesize like that if the house was burning, it would have pushed the fire towards the stairway basically directly. I mean, still fire doesn't follow, a straight line necessarily regardless, but so there's that as well. So the two sons, this is what Justin was just hinting at, made another attempt here to get the kids out from upstairs, which is number one, they had kept a ladder apparently behind the house as a way, supposedly, to like prevent situations like this. Like Just like, my house, they're like, you should have a basement ladder just in case you're stuck in the basement. You got to get out somehow. It's like, okay. So this was their way to get out, except the ladder was not there. And then they had another idea here, which was, I think, was it John, I believe, that tried to start the truck, or was it George Jr.? I forget, one of the two. Tried to use one of the family's coal trucks essentially to pull it up to the house so the kids could jump, you know, 8 feet instead of 25 feet to their death or whatever.
The source I'm looking says George Jr., but that
George
could be
Jr.
a different source.
I couldn't remember
so,
which one it was, so
yeah.
let's go with that. But they tried to start the truck and essentially he like choked it out and the truck didn't start, so they couldn't get it over there. Meanwhile, as this is happening, Mom back in the picture here, actually doing something. She runs to the neighbor's house, and this is fairly rural West Virginia. So I think they said they're only like 2 miles from the town that was south of them, but the middle of nowhere, country setting type place. Goes to the neighbor's home to use the phone, calls the fire department, but there's a problem here. Basically, the phone operator, it says, did not respond to what she was saying. And then the neighbor placed a second phone call, which also did not result in getting through to the fire department. Meanwhile, Dad, back in the photo as well, was going to take buckets to fill up with water to try to start putting out the house fire himself. But because it was so cold, the barrel was frozen solid with all the water, and he actually couldn't get any water out to do that with. All right, now, the house burns down. Let's just end that half right there. Aftermath of this, because a lot of this interesting stuff comes out on Christmas morning. Fire department does finally show up, although it's, to my knowledge, what I read, not the official fire department. It was like a volunteer fire department that came from someplace nearby, but it took them 7 hours to get there, and they don't get there until close to 8 a.m. And that was only after another neighbor called them as well.
Okay, that I was just about to say that because there's just another inconsistency I stumbled across, because some sources say another neighbor put in the call and that finally got through. Another source I saw says that none of the calls got through, and another neighbor had to physically travel into town to alert the fire department there. So I don't know which one of those is true.
That's the account that I've heard.
So,
well, this is the other weird thing about the timing on this, because am I wrong? It said it was like 2 miles to the nearest city. Like they showed a map at one point. And I mean, it's not going to take you 7 hours to drive to a city 2 miles away, get the fire department, and come back.
So the details I have on that were that the one person had to drive in, and then somehow they found the fire chief. The fire chief then had to call each member of the fire department individually, which apparently the phone lines or the operator, whatever's, he was able to get through at that point and was calling people. And the problem was compounded by the fact that the fire chief could not drive the fire truck. So the first person to know about it had and it wasn't specified whether or not he physically had some inability to drive it, or if he just didn't know how to drive it, or if he was unlicensed and was like, I can't drive this. I don't have a license. I don't know what.
Or if he was drunk because it was Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
Could be too, honestly,
details
right?
were.
Yeah.
But it was stated he couldn't drive the truck and therefore had rally troops. But it still wasn't clear as to how the hell it takes 6 to 8 hours to get a few miles to this house. I don't have details on that, but it seems absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, so things I said, it kind of echo what you just said. I think the video hypothesized the 3 reasons that they didn't get there in time were no one knew how to drive the truck. The police chief, basically, by the time he found out about it, had kind of internally made the decision that it was too late and they couldn't save the house at that point. And the third thing was the weather prevented them from getting there quicker, but I don't know.
I've also seen a fourth thing that might factor in. This was still during the war, so I heard speculated that there might have been a man shortage in terms of people who were actually able to man the equipment.
Some of the fire department had been called to war, so that that was a half volunteer half department.
But
Mhm.
even so, like an entire waking day's worth of time, it's 6 to 8 hours. That just seems that is still preposterous, even with all of
Mm.
those things compounded together.
Could have pushed the fire truck to to the spot
Yeah,
by
lash
that
it to a
point.
mule or something.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So let's just keep going with the narrative here. So the house has burned down to I mean, basically it's caved in on itself. There's not a lot left. It's all in what used to be the basement, essentially. We'll bring up the basement here in a minute as well. And then we get, when the fire department finally does get there, we get who, I don't know about you guys, but I found this to be the most interesting character in the entire mystery, which is Fire Chief Morris, who
Hmm.
seemed to be in the middle of about 10 questions that are posed by this mystery. And I can't say definitively, but I would have to think if anybody might know the truth about this case, he might have been the one,
He's real shady.
but
Yeah.
maybe not. We'll see. All right, so let's go on here. So the five children are declared dead, either of fire or suffocation. And at this point, the fire chief, Mr. Morris, told George that he should go through the wreckage of the house and find five piles of ashes that he wants to collect so that he could signify burying his children someplace. The fire chief, when he talks to George, allows George to fill the basement in with sand, is the plan, because George took it on himself that he basically wanted to fill the house in, I guess, and kind of just bury the kids there, more or less. And the state fire marshals told him that he couldn't do it, that it was against the law, and apparently that it was still more or less a crime scene, even though they were declared dead, I think, at this point already. The house does get filled in, interestingly, by a new character in our tale. It was not George, but it was Jeannie's brother, who grabs basically some heavy equipment and fills the hole in, covering up the burned house, which
That was
is
information I didn't have.
some real shady
I
shit here.
I I think there's something different I saw with the timeline of filling in the basement because
Fill us in.
okay. I see what you did there.
Fill us
Yeah.
in.
So I had heard that after, the fire had mostly burnt out, I don't remember exactly which source this is. I'm kind of like poking through as I'm talking here. Where basically they wanted the parents, that is, wanted to turn the space into like a memorial garden for the children.
Okay.
And but they were told, wait for us to bring in more people to do a more thorough investigation. Don't do anything with the wreckage. Just leave it alone until other people get here. 4 days go by, and apparently by the end of those 4 days, George and or Jenny couldn't bear the sight of the wreckage anymore, and then they made the decision to just bulldoze a bunch of dirt over what could have still been worthwhile evidence. But why it took that long, I have no idea. There's a whole, I mean, there's a lot of this that doesn't quite line up to other parts depending on what source you're going from. But I did hear that they were asked not to mess with the scene, and then they
Yeah,
couldn't wait
okay.
no longer than 4 days, and then did it. So yeah.
Um, yes, I forgot to mention that, at least in the documentary, which I'm counting as a good source because, again, they had connections with the daughter of one of these people. But interestingly, the mom and the dad never went to the funeral for their kids. So when they brought the Reverend out and they had the townsfolk come over, which they said was a pretty big crowd, hundreds of people showed up for this. The mom and the dad didn't go because it said they were too distraught with grief to actually attend the actual ceremony. Um, which I could get on the one hand, but again, on the other hand, like looking at this through the lens of time now, again, just looks kind of odd for sure. Okay. Now, well, I have one more here. I have one more from right then, which is the next day after the fire on the 26th, I believe, or maybe they mean this is the 25th. I think it was the 26th, though.
Hmm.
John, who was, again, the oldest kid here, 23 years old, apparently leaked to the press that he believed someone had started the fire, that it wasn't accidental. And so that was quoted someplace in there as well.
So in the account that I have, it's probably a
Yeah.
good place to put this in. Uh, it was stated that it didn't say it exactly time wise, but like I'm guessing like within a day, like the next day after the fire, they had searched, like sifted through the rubble essentially and found no human remains.
Mm.
Um, it doesn't like I don't it doesn't say exactly like how well they searched it, if they like dug out a bunch of the rubble out of the basement to dig through it or what. I don't know the process. But it was stated that they searched through the rubble and found no remains.
Was this independent people searching, or was this the family you're talking about?
The
I think it
family,
was the
from my
police.
understanding,
I oh
Okay.
I
family
I
and
thought it
or
was,
authorities.
yeah.
Okay, let me keep going here. I got a little bit, maybe. I think I might have a percentage on that yet. So essentially, the family, from all things I can gather, more or less after the event happened, accepted that that was the case, that those five kids had died in the fire tragedy. I mean, how could you think otherwise, really? Like, if your
Mm-hmm.
family died in a fire, the house was gone, everything was in a huge pile, mess heap, you would kind of just assume the worst happened. And man, we'll see if that's the worst. I don't know, it might be. But that was kind of where they were at. And then, according to the timeline I have here, at least 1947 is when they started to have doubt on the idea that the kids had died in the house. When I don't know how it happened. The parents saw a picture of like a school in New York City, and the picture looked like their kid, like a little
Hmm.
bit more old than he was when he was with them. Um, and I believe, if I'm not getting my parts mixed up here, I think
They traveled there, right?
yeah, I think they sent a detective, and like the detective wouldn't go or something, and then so they just went themselves and looked at the kid, and basically it was not their kid, right? It was more or
I,
less.
the account I saw said that the family wouldn't let them see the child because, crazy people from a different state showing up saying, "You've got my kid." I mean, yeah,
Oh,
Right. Yeah.
okay.
yeah.
That I didn't have, so that's interesting.
And again, another inconsistency. So,
Yeah. All right. Now we got to talk about Mr. Fire Chief Morris a little bit more here. So we're running 2+ years after, maybe not quite 2 years, because I guess it happened at the end of 45, but somehow there's this box that was in the wreckage of the house that has a chunk of an organ in it, which originally, this is where you got to decide who you believe what's what on here. The thing I read first said that Fire Chief Morris put what he believed was a human heart in a box in the basement. He may or may not have told someone about this, but was later persuaded to dig it up after he pointed to where he put the box in the ground. The box was opened at a funeral home, and the whatever person you're going to call this here determined that it was not a heart but a liver, and they believe it was from a cow.
mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a guy named Harold Gay who did the appraisal. It looks like I did write a name down there.
Okay.
The box was put on the back steps to have like more people do testing on this, and they kept it on the back step because it smelled so bad. So they
I
took
did
it
see
out
that
of
part.
they took it out of the funeral home. They put it on the back porch, and then it sat there for 10 days until the person that the whatever, the mortician or whoever,
Mhm.
called this other people to come pick it up and do a secondary test on it. 10 days later, they finally call this guy back and say, sorry about that. We got mixed up. We'll come pick it up. No big deal. He goes out to check it, and it's gone. And
Of
the
course.
thought is that the basically the city trash came around and thought it was trash because it was just like sitting on the back porch for
Oh,
10 days and probably got burned with the rest of the trash.
well, part of this that you didn't mention is that a few sources I stumbled across said that Morris did this because he thought that the family finding, quote, any evidence that their kids died in the fire would get them to drop the case.
Yeah, that's what I
Which
heard as well.
raises the question of why did he bury it? Why did he put it in a box? I mean, none of it makes sense. It wasn't burned. He didn't even go through the process of trying to like make it look like it was scorched. It was just raw beef
Yeah.
liver he threw in a box. It's like, oh, that's a human heart. And why would a heart not burn
But
when
everything else
did?
except the heart, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think this guy was the sharpest tool in the shed.
Everything about that story was just so ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, and this like again begs this bigger point of like what I guess it depends what you think happened, but there's a running through line on this whole case of like the police and the fire department and like the state, whether they have the family's best interests in mind or not. Because there were a few things that basically said like, they had lost their kids and all these people like came out of nowhere to be like, oh, your kids might have been kidnapped or maybe they escaped or maybe they didn't burn or whatever. And so the family like was going to listen to anybody who'd feed them this shit.
Mm-hmm.
And so the state was mentioned a couple times, basically was like, you are being taken advantage of for every last penny your family has. Like your kids are gone. Stop listening to all these charlatans and just give up. But, they followed every little lead they had. So it was kind of interesting. I don't know. And then the police chief, or not police chief, the fire chief, like, I don't know what this dude's deal is.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
mentioned the vertebrae.
Oh, yeah, they did find some actual. All right,
Bones.
yeah, they did find some. Okay, hold on. Yeah, we're getting right there.
Okay.
So we're in 1948, and it says, said in the documentary that this is actually the moment when this case actually hit the big time. Like prior to this, it was a very local story. So 1948, the family pays for a 2/3 page ad or space in the Charleston Gazette where they outline all of the facts of their own family's case, essentially, asking like if anybody has any details on what happened here and if the kids may be gone, etc. To the point where we now have, as I just referenced there by Justin, 1949, in August, George starts to excavate his own home site, digging up basically the whole family basement again, trying to see what they find in there. And this is where they find 6 bones. This is even weirder. They find only 6 bones sifting through the old basement, of which 4 were determined to be human. The hell is that about?
Not only were they human, they were human vertebrae. And they sent, this is where the Smithsonian actually comes in. So the bones were sent to the Smithsonian Institute to try and analyze them, get a feel for, if they could have been from one of the kids or if they were all from the same person. And they determined that the bones had no evidence of being charred. So they weren't touched by the fire. They weren't scorched. They weren't burnt. They determined they belonged to a single individual, likely a male between the ages of 16 and 22, because of something with how the like parts of your vertebrae change or fuse or something at around that age. And that age is older than any of the kids who were the male children that were left in the house.
Yep.
It's not impossible that it was from Maurice, the oldest, who was 14, though it was, quote, improbable that he would have that skeletal maturation by his age. So these aren't from anyone in the house.
Yeah,
It's some of Chief Morris's stuff that he likes to toss.
It was speculated in what I heard that the dirt that they used to fill in the basement, like the bones had been in that dirt. But then that raises the question of where the hell was this dirt and why was there human remains in the dirt? So it just opens up a whole nother can of worms. But you're right. Yes, they do finally find human remains, and they almost certainly can't come from one of the children.
Yeah.
Does make one wonder where they came from, that's for sure.
I think I don't know which source it was, but I swear I saw one source that speculated they got the dirt from a cemetery. So, which raises a whole new slew of questions. But again, that was I don't remember which source it was, so I can't point you to it. But yeah, WTF 1940s America.
It's craziness.
Uh, yeah.
All right. Next thing up we have here, in the 1950s. Well, I'll go to this other one first here because I don't have a date on this, but supposedly it's no, no, no. Let's do this.
Do we want to go back a bit and talk about the thief?
Let's come back to him.
Oh, okay, okay,
I'm saving him till a little later here.
okay.
All
Sounds
right,
good.
let's go back a second here. So the 1950s, we're plowing forward in time here. Um, okay. So 1950s here, we have a report that came out. And this was like a document that they showed a real picture of. It's old typewritten stuff. It basically said there was a report that Jeannie's own brother, a guy by the name of Ginny Cipriani, who is the guy who, in my version at least, filled the house back in the first time, prosecuting attorney Carl Vickers, Fire Chief Morris, and Reverend James Frame all testified that they had seen or handled human remains. But this did not come out as a document until 6 or 7 years after the house had burned.
That's not my hand heard either. That's crazy.
Jeez.
Because to my knowledge, they all like no one testified having found any remains
Except
at
this
the, at the
human
time,
heart.
except the heart.
I don't know why that's my voice for the fire chief, but
Just the heart I came with. Nothing else here. It's weird. Like, there seems to be a lot of people changing their story as time goes on, or at least it's being reported differently, which could just be human error, but also could lead to some possible theories here later on. Okay. And then the last thing I had timeline-wise, I think, is a note that said, see, and this contradicts as well, but there was a report. Oh, this must be referring to, no, I don't know. This is Chief Morris again, but this one doesn't say the liver or the human heart. This one said it was a container that he had placed in the basement full of body parts. Which maybe it is referring to the liver now that I'm rereading this, but the interesting thing about this is Morris testified that he thought he did tell people at the time he put it down there. And he was surprised when people brought it up to him years later and said, like, why didn't you tell us about this? And he was like, oh, I thought I did tell you about that. And they were like, no, you didn't. Okay. Continuing on here, let's see. As the kids are gone, this is what I have to finish up the timeline, at least here, prior to a couple other events we'll talk about in a second here, I guess. But we have a famous, at the time, sign that was put up by the family by the road asking for information about their children. And I forget how they had it worded now because I don't have it in front of me, but it was like murdered, kidnapped, died in fire, or something like that. There were 3 choices, but basically it was asking for information.
Essentially, yeah, the billboard was like postulating possible things that could have happened.
What had happened to them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got a picture of the second billboard they put up, but not the first one.
The 10,000?
The oh, hang on, let me scroll back down.
Oh, you mean the more
after
permanent
30
looking
years,
one.
it's not too late to investigate. So the one that they put up later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they had a $5,000 reward, then a switch to a 10,000 on a later sign, and then they had like a more permanent one put up. Okay, let's continue our narrative here up to the year 1967, where a pretty impactful event happened for the family. So we still have mom and dad at this point. And my webpage is not showing that. It's only half there. So does anybody want to hit that 1967? With the
you talking about the photo?
picture? Yeah.
You want to do this, Brett, or should I?
I don't have a lot on that in my notes.
This is
Okay.
like not loading the second half of this webpage. This is weird. Oh, page
Okay. So,
unresponsive, no doubt.
Jenny gets a letter in the mail, postmarked from Central City, Kentucky. Inside was a photo of a man who, accounting for the years that have passed, looked a lot like her son, Lewis. On the back of the photo, there was a message written, quote, Lewis Sodder, followed by I love brother Frankie, little boys, not little, but Lil, but spelled wrong, LLIL, all lowercase, and then A90132 or 35. That's all that was scrawled on the back of the photo.
What more do you need?
Well, you see, you need to enter those numbers every periodically, otherwise the world is going to end. I've never seen Lost, but so yeah, so this gives her renewed hope, perhaps false hope, that at least one of her kids, Lewis, is out there somewhere. But I don't believe he had a brother named Frankie, and there is speculation that the number could represent some sort of postal code. So on the source that I'm looking at, which is from HuffPost, 90135, for example, can be found in the city of Palermo, the capital of the Italian island of Sicily. So the broadest extrapolation of this is that somehow a letter from Kentucky got sent to her telling her that her son is alive and well back in Sicily, which, yeah, we haven't really touched much on the Italian connection yet, but
Not
that
yet,
is a
yeah.
factor. And I don't want to jump the gun. So yeah, this is just bizarre, and it's one of the numerous cases of people saying they've seen the children over the years, but it to me it feels like people saying they've seen Elvis. It's just, oh yeah, I totally saw this person who's probably dead, and they're 2 states away, and there's no way to corroborate what I'm saying, but I totally seen it with my eyes, that
Right.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
But so yeah, mysterious photo, which then got added to that billboard later on as further material for people to try and look at and provide further leads and such. So
Okay. Well, the next event I have is 1969 of note here, and that is the unfortunate passing away of the dad, George. So he is presuming that you don't think he is involved with this in any way, shape, or form. That is a terrible way to go because he never knew the truth about what happened to his kids, or at least he thought he never knew the truth about it. Maybe he did. And then, as Justin mentioned, there were a couple other sightings through the years for the kids, other little trails that kind of didn't go too far. And 1989, the mom passes away. Jeannie still believing till the day she died and declaring that something had happened to her kids, essentially. No peace for her. So, you know, probably a ghost out there somewhere, I'm guessing, on that one. Okay, so I think does anybody else have anything narrative wise?
there's the bit I mentioned earlier, but it sounds like we're swinging back to that guy, the
Okay,
thief. So,
well,
but
let's go
go ahead.
back to some of the weird things that also happened that night, which may or may not be part of the story. But there's a couple interesting things here that kind of happened, and some more contradictions and some more interesting testimonies here. So, Justin, you want to tell us about somebody else that happened to maybe be on the premises at the time?
Okay, so I think this was either 1 or 2 days after the house burned down. The family received word that someone, they received word from the investigators, like the firemen on the site, that the phone line that it had been assumed had simply been burnt through was actually cut. And this led to some.
What?
Yeah, but it gets, believe it or not, it gets stranger because that seems like okay, it's evidence of foul play, but it was cut by someone who apparently was it the garage or a shed, some sort of outbuilding, on the premises where he was stealing block and tackle from the family, and for some reason to facilitate this theft, he cut the phone lines despite not being directly in the house. I mean, yes, if someone saw him, they wouldn't be able to necessarily call the cops, but it just seems like a very odd measure to take. Trying to, I want to say I found a name for this guy somewhere, but I'm digging through the things I have bookmarked. I'm not seeing
I
it.
have it. It is
Mhm.
Lonnie Johnson.
Lonnie Johnson, thank you. And was it one of the? I'm trying to remember who it was that saw him, because somebody saw him on the premises, and I'm trying to remember who the hell it was. Uh, but anyway, this guy was on the grounds that night that the fire took place, and it seems very coincidental if he would just happen to be around stealing stuff from the family when their
Yeah.
house just burst into flames,
Mhm.
especially if you factor in the whole bus driver or bus passenger or car driver or car passenger who quote unquote saw balls of fire being hurled at the house. Um,
Could
Yeah,
have
and
been ball lightning.
plus
but
you have
yeah,
to the call, the wrong number call that came in at 12:30. That's in that
that
timeline as well. So the
Good
phones
point.
would have been working prior to them being cut by Lonnie,
true,
supposedly.
true, yeah.
That's a good point.
Huh, yeah, I hadn't considered that. I
So
kind of just wrote
somehow
off.
he would have had to have been there between the time of that call and the fire being started, or
Right.
during the fire.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It is weird.
That's
That phone call, I mean, probably was just a drunk wrong number, but it's interesting. Like, I don't know why. I was trying to think why you would call somebody, like to see if they're home or like to see if they're awake. But if you call, obviously they wake up, so that doesn't really make sense either. Um, yeah, it's interesting. So, back on the telephone wire as well, they mentioned in the video, I think that they estimated it was about 14 feet above the ground and also just far enough away from the actual pole that somebody probably didn't hold on to the pole and cut it. So they never
hmm.
really determined how it was cut to begin with. Now we do have a missing ladder in the picture, but
Hmm.
to my guess, in the 1940s, I highly doubt they have like a double extendable aluminum ladder that they're having out there. So it's probably like
Not
a
likely.
single-sided wood ladder, which
Hmm.
you could put against the pole, but you still might not be able to stretch far enough out to cut
Hmm.
the line where they claim it was cut at. So, and they
I'll
never
be
found the ladder. There's that fact too.
I saw some sources saying it was found later on in a ditch,
Yes,
Really?
quite a ways
down the
away.
road. Yes.
Oh,
Yep.
wow. Okay.
Yeah, they found the ladder that had been missing from the side of the house the night of the fire at the bottom of an embankment 75 feet away.
Interesting. So somebody threw the ladder down the hill.
Hmm.
Wow. Okay. I didn't get that. That's interesting.
Yeah, and it is really telling that we're all finding different pieces of this, and yeah, it just shows how strange of a case this is.
Um, let's see. What do I have left here? Pre-theories. So I just have a couple notes here. They interviewed a person that worked at the funeral. It's funny because we just did our spontaneous human combustion episode not that long ago, and I thought that actually led into this pretty well because
Yeah.
Yeah.
the funeral home in Cincinnati that they checked with said that if your house was on fire for 2 hours at 2,000 degrees, you guys getting flashbacks from the other
Yeah.
podcast? 2 hours at 2,000 degrees would not be enough to vaporize a human skeleton, much less five children, so that they would not be able to be found in the house.
Mhm.
And there was speculation then on top of that that like the way the house fire was described, basically it was a smoldering ruin for hours and hours. So, but potentially there's enough time there that could have happened, I guess.
And it should be noted that after hearing that, Jenny or Jeannie, however you do pronounce her name, took it upon herself to do some science, for lack of a better term, and burned various types of animal bones in various types of conditions to see if she could reduce them to just ashes. And lo and behold, nothing she tried, it seemed like it would do the trick. So
Interesting.
yeah.
I hadn't seen that either. So she was really far down the mind warped
Yeah.
path, huh?
But I mean, if you're looking for answers, they can lead you to some strange places sometimes.
The last note I have before theories just said that, and it's not necessarily clear where this came about, if it was the initial report or if it was, sorry, the initial overview of the property, or if this was when they excavated again later, these were found or what. But apparently somebody found two 55-gallon drums in the house of the basement of the house, of which George Sodder never officially said what they were for,
Huh.
which was odd. Now, I did also hear, I think in that documentary I watched, but they also said they would often do a lot of the like engine repairs and things for the trucks in the basement as well. That was kind of like a makeshift garage for them in a way.
Yeah, I was under the impression they were either gasoline or oil.
That's kind of what I wondered, which is interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
oil, I guess, would be one thing, but if you have two 55-gallon drums of gasoline in your basement and your house is on fire, I would think that would be a very different news story than the one we have here.
Mm-hmm.
A little more explosive based, as it
Yeah.
were. Does anybody have anything else pre-theories here?
I do actually. I was trying
Yeah.
to do some searching in the background here because neither of you had mentioned it, and it feels like it's a very large like chunk of the story, and it in some ways it actually like sounds like too good to be true. But I can get that here. It sounds like neither of you have any information on the nameless man who was a former business partner of George.
Ooh.
I think maybe
I
there's a
have the
theory on this one, but keep going.
nameless because his name has been omitted from official records because basically for his own protection.
Whoa. No, I had stuff on like the insurance salesman and like an
okay.
electrician.
This is same guy as the insurance salesman potentially.
Okay.
And yeah. So, anyways, the story that I am familiar with here says there was a man who was as I say, some sort of former business partner for George. They didn't go into detail on what that was, but he was a close enough friend with the family that he actually had co-signed the Sodder home insurance policy. So he basically was like set to receive money if the house burned down. On top of that, so they had gotten into an argument at one point and basically had like severed relations. But at some point, this man came around and tried to sell life insurance to the Sodders for the children.
That's right.
And this man who, after George basically said, "Get the F out of here, I'm not buying life insurance for my children," this man was quoted as saying that their home was going to go up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed.
Whoa.
Okay, so there's that.
I saw a second part to that quote, but I don't know if we want to save that for the theories in a bit here.
Well, I'll throw it out there. How about that? We'll circle back around to it. The latter part, as Justin was just saying, the latter part of that quote was that you are going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini. Okay, so it's getting political as well. Now, this man, they said his name had been omitted from official records, and it goes deeper than that. In that apparently the authorities, the police, and other investigators never questioned this guy officially.
Oh my God.
And the prosecutor couldn't be convinced to bring up a case against him, essentially because he was too well connected in the community. Like he
Whoa.
held enough power
And
that the prosecutor feared bringing a case against him.
Wow.
Um,
geez.
and another layer of that was apparently this man was the chairman of the coroner's jury, which was the group that ruled that the Sodder fire had been an accident. So there's many layers to this part of the story. And like I say, it almost seems like a dramatization because you hear all that and it's like, that can't possibly be real. But this is
Hmm.
the story that that I
But then
was
we've
made aware, the account that I've heard.
yeah. But then we've got on the other hand the fire chief burying a piece of beef liver in a box and saying
Right.
it's a heart. So
Right. Yeah. That is not the craziest part of the story, actually.
Oh, craziness.
yeah.
What else? You guys got anything else before theories here? Anything else, Justin, on your end?
Uh anything else I have is pretty much theory related.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right, well, let's jump to theories here. Let's throw some out there. So, who wants to start? What's a possible explanation for this week's zany Christmas case? Well, Brett, you just hit on the one, right?
Mhm.
Which is like, so Brett, if following that timeline, is that did he actually kill the kids then? Or did he
Um,
kidnap them, or what's
the the theories in my investigation actually didn't really link him to the children at all. It was like this man possibly like started the fire, but it wasn't there wasn't any kind of speculation as to how the children factored into that. Like,
hmm.
did he get them out of there? Did they were they just burned up in the fire, or what the deal was there?
Well, between if I can jump in,
Yeah.
between the threats, the Mussolini thing, and the fact that it should be mentioned this was a very it was a community very saturated with Italian immigrants. So I mean so that like the family, George and Jenny, they were Italian. This former business partner, also Italian. A lot of heavy Italian influence in this area. So there's speculation either, well, I mean, with the Mussolini thing, Nazi sympathizers or the mafia was involved in this whole thing. Um, I'm not sure how much credence I put in either of those things, but of the two, I think the mafia connection is the more likely.
I definitely think there's
Especially,
enough here to at least question the mafia angle on this one for sure.
Mm.
You got a guy showing up at a, you know, excavated house to throw body parts into it. Like in my head, I'm thinking like somebody told him to go do that. Like he didn't
Mhm,
do that.
Right.
that's
Yeah.
fair. And we didn't. I mentioned in passing, but the insurance guy slash former partner wasn't the only one to make very thinly veiled threatening remarks about the house and fire. There was I think he was an electrician or something that had stopped by, like a freelance guy looking for work, and he made a passing comment about a couple of the fuse boxes or circuit breakers, saying, "Oh, those are going to start a fire someday. You better be careful."
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
which was interesting because George had recently had the house rewired to to account for, I think, an addition or something like that. So he either wrote it off, or a friend of the family told him, "Oh, this guy's just looking for more work, or he's looking to upcharge you. Don't give him the time of day." And he didn't think anything else of it. So it wasn't just the one guy making threats towards him. It was kind of a recurring thing, which is interesting in and of itself. Because I've seen it said that George was a very outspoken guy about a lot of things, including politics. And if he was outspoken about the wrong sorts of politics, and if there were
Yeah.
other ties in the community that had a mafia influence, yeah, there after a certain point, I could see them wanting to shut him up. So
I don't remember if it was your podcast you referred to, Brett, or the documentary I watched, but it said, and I guess I hadn't thought about it, but I didn't know the answer to this, but it said the mafia was very anti-Mussolini. So if the guy
Right.
was saying
Oh,
anti-Mussolini things, the mafia would have been on his side, actually, which is kind of
oh,
interesting.
Yeah,
huh.
yeah, because he basically Mussolini was like cracking down on organized crime, so the mafia
Yeah.
was not. We're not fans of Mussolini, so yeah, exactly like you say. If George
Huh.
was talking smack about him, they would not have been going after him because of that. They would have been
Because of
like,
that, right? That's the
yeah,
key,
Hmm.
right?
yeah,
Like, he
Yeah,
very well could have pissed off the mafia in some other way.
yeah. I There's
fair.
another interesting angle that maybe fits in now. Um, and again, this is all part of the accounts that I've heard. And actually, like the more and more we're going through this, I'm kind of like questioning how much of this are hard facts and how much are possibly embellished a bit.
Hmm.
But uh, the story that I heard was that George had emigrated from Italy at 13 years old, and made the trip uh, well, not solo, but his brother came with him, but his brother went back. So he basically came to the United States alone and would never talk about why he left Italy.
Hmm.
Like people would like ask him like, "Well, why did you leave?" And like he would never talk about it.
Hmm.
So there's like hinting as to there's something in his background that he refuses to talk about, and he had to leave
Huh.
Italy because of it. So I don't know how that fits in. If that's just
Interesting.
some embellishment to, to make it sound good, but that's the story I've heard.
Hmm.
Hmm. So, yeah, I don't know. He could be hiding something. I mean, people came here
Yeah,
for all sorts of reasons, I guess.
yeah, and it's interesting that yeah, if his dark past did catch up to him, and the cryptic stuff scrawled on the back of that photo was actually the postal code for um Sicily or Sardinia, was it? Uh,
Tulsa,
okay, to clarify that,
Sardinia, I think it was, right?
yeah, well, that's where he was born. He was born in Tula or Tulsa, Sardinia. Again, the reporting on this is very spotty in parts. So that was George. That's where he was born before he moved over. Sicily was the place where the postal code was from. So if it does have some sort of mafia connection, it seems a little beyond the pale that they would just kidnap the children and take them back to Italy, Sicily specifically. Because usually when from my understanding at least, when the mafia kidnaps someone, they expect something in return. They don't just kidnap kids. This isn't a movie where if these kids were like
Yeah.
raised to be assassins or something like that. The mafia would have wanted something in return. They wouldn't just take kids for no good reason.
Mm.
So
Yeah, I did
it's
hear
just
that mentioned on some source too, that like if it was the mafia, they would have been bragging about it. Like they would have held it over the family, not been quiet.
right. Yeah.
Uh, let's see what else I got here. Oh, this is just a little section, I guess. Just the Sodders themselves put out some counterpoints to some of the facts in the case. This is just kind of a tangent here, but
Hmm.
um, confusion over again why there were very few human remains left. Could they have been burned away? Could not have been burned away. They didn't think they could have completely burned away the bodies. Um, was the house hot enough to cremate the bodies? Essentially, again, was that question of did it smolder for hours on end? Is that enough to keep the bodies melting and burning? The phone and the ladder again was kind of bizarro. Boy, you guys found that thing about the ladder. That really makes me question that because that piece didn't come back in anything I saw. So that's cool.
Mm.
Really makes me wonder though, like who did that then? Hmm.
Yeah.
And then there was also note, I don't think we mentioned in detail about originally they kind of pawned this off on the electrical problem. But they all testified that when they were running out of the house, the electricity was still on.
Hmm.
So there was a problem of the electrical started the fire, except we ran out of the house in lights at nighttime, so not necessarily. But there was
Huh.
also some confusion there as far as apparently the house had two fuse boxes, and somebody said that if even one of them had failed, it would have been enough to start the fire while the electricity was still on.
Hmm.
So some
Suppose that's
confusion there.
possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, what else we got here? Other theories. So one, which kind of hit on already here, but just thinking about the time period was that these kids would have been kidnapped to be sold on the black market, basically, of
Yeah,
things
like
that were
human
happening at the time.
human trafficking angle.
Yeah. Apparently it was pretty pricey back then to buy a kid secondhand from people. And this was a very documented thing, like the Lindbergh baby and other things. That was a
Mm.
ransom case, but there were a lot of them, and it said West Virginia was among the top states at this time period for this.
Ooh.
Um, they listed Ohio as one of the current states that this is bad for, so
Hmm.
Oh,
there's
geez.
that. So yeah, what do you think on kidnapping here? Is well, I don't know. Let me throw this last one I got out here, and then we'll kind of. So
Oh.
specifically, a different theory they had listed here was that the kids were actually kidnapped by the brother of Jeannie and taken to Tampa, which they went so far as to. This is where the FBI got involved with the case actually, and traced these kids that they found in Tampa living with the brother, and the FBI agents were able to like basically find enough genealogical records to say that these kids had always lived with the brother that was in Florida, and they can't be the same kids.
Hmm.
So there's that. But I mean, what do you guys think of like this is a hard case, right? I love that we have hard
Yeah.
cases though. Like we never have an easy case. To me, like here's where you start with this one. If you have more theories, feel free to throw them out there. But like the first thing you got to ask yourself is like, were the kids in the house when it burned? Because if
Right.
so, okay, then they're probably just dead. Somehow their bones evaporated. And then you can speculate as to what or who started the fire. Or were the kids not in the house when the fire happened? And then if that's the case, where were they when it was happening?
I did see mention in a few of the articles I read saying that the family doesn't think they were in the house when the fire happened because when the brothers called out to them, there was no answer and there was no sound of screaming or shouting from the upstairs where they would have been. Um, so, I mean, take that for what you will. Maybe smoke inhalation could have, knocked them out or whatever, but apparently when they were trying to call out to them or get to them, there were no answering shouts, screams, cries, anything from what they were saying. So
This was as the fire's taking place, or
yeah, as the fire was breaking out and the family was trying to either get to the other kids or calling out trying to get a response, they didn't hear anything in response. So
that's interesting. We've
mhm.
also established the brothers have shouted at the kids upstairs and shaken the kids upstairs. So
Yeah, that's really what part of what makes this case so bloody difficult because who's to say what actually, I mean, even with what we have to work with, who's to say which parts actually happened and which ones didn't? So, yeah, like the thing that may or may not have been a grenade, the
yeah,
shaking versus calling out to the brothers, yeah, just all of these things that just don't quite line up,
the
and it
rando
really,
on the property.
yeah, and it seems like there should have been some more concrete account of this by now, but it seems like no one bothered to really keep accurate tabs, which again leads to the idea that maybe this was a bigger thing than just a house fire that you know took the lives of 5 kids.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or
that I
again,
mean, yeah, go
stories have
ahead.
been changing over the years for one reason or another, whether it's just that they're remembering things differently or whether
Mm,
they are purposely changing their stories for one reason or another, or
yeah,
what. Because it does seem like there's even from the family themselves have been giving different reports, seems.
true, true.
That's yeah. I mean, I don't know. If you're the family, like you have motivation to change your story to try to make it sound like you did the absolute best job you could in the moment of the emergency. Like, is
Hmm.
that why
Mm.
the brothers are like, oh no, we shook them. We totally did that. Yes.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah.
I don't know.
Hmm.
To me, the idea that anybody could have started the fire for whatever reason, but the idea that somebody like came in and snuck out 5 people from this family without the rest of the family realizing this, which would mean so either they're somehow literally stealing him out of the room that the older sister is asleep in, or they
Right.
have got into the house, went up the stairs, and stole presumably some out of the girl's room and some out of the boy's room where the two oldest brothers are sleeping at the time,
And
and
the
then made it
only
back out with them.
Mhm.
yeah, and then the only feasible way to do that would be through a window, which means probably one kid at a time. If the ladder reached that far to actually get up to the window, and the window was unlocked, and there was no sound of breaking glass, which it's just there's so many contingencies to this idea that it stretches believability, I think.
And
Mhm.
if you were to, all right, if let's say you somehow theoretically could sneak in, steal five kids, and sneak out. Like if you were to able to do that, then what's the motivation after that to start the fire? Because at that point, you're just waking the family up and bringing people towards where you're at.
To make it seem like they died, I guess, is the only thing
Yeah,
that makes
try
any
and
sort of sense.
cover your
I
tracks.
guess.
Don't bother looking for your kids; they're dead. They're not being sold into human slavery or whatever.
Shit about that insurance when I gave you the chance.
That Mussolini
Uh,
sends his regards.
he was dead by then. Anyway,
He was.
Yeah.
I don't know on this one, man. Oh, I do have one theory left here that I saw just mentioned briefly on Brett's podcast he was referring to. Spontaneous human combustion.
It was brought up,
It
yes.
It
comes
was.
full circle.
The older sister probably fell asleep. The five kids went in the basement, accidentally burst into flames
Fell on those oil drums.
next to the oil drums, knocking them over as they reached out for help. And then no, I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any chance that these kids didn't die that night? I mean, where are you guys leaning towards here at this point? We didn't go into it, but
Personally,
there were the reports of people serving them food, or people that looked like them serving
Or-
food, or like seeing them in a car or on the highway,
Mhm.
or like there
in a
were reports
hotel.
supposedly, yeah,
Yeah.
kids who couldn't talk to people that were in the restaurant or whatever, and
Yeah.
Italian people speaking Italian, doing Italian-y things.
Well, that's suspicious. No.
Right.
I don't know
I mean,
if we hadn't. Oh, go on.
I would say, especially since we just just a few weeks ago did the human combustion thing. It seems really unbelievable to me that they wouldn't find any remains in the rubble of the house. Like, for me, it really kind of leans towards that they weren't in the house to begin with. Because I don't think we had mentioned, but reportedly the fire lasted like less than an hour. Like the entire house went up in less than an hour.
Yeah, it
like
was
it
pretty
burned to
short.
nothing.
Yeah.
And so it's like a very short time frame, and it they talked about the possibility that the ruins had been like smoldering, and perhaps they burned up the rest of the way when they smoldered a bit. I think like a smoldering fire is like much lower temperature than like an open flame fire as well. So
It's lower oxygen.
we talked about
so, yeah.
we talked about needing to be a certain temperature. And I don't think that the smoldering pile would get up high enough to cremate the bodies the rest of the way that way either. So even if it had been there sitting there smoldering for, I mean, I'm not an expert on this obviously, but even have been like several days smoldering like that, I don't think it would have like burned up the bones the rest of the way. So I'm leaning heavily towards that the kids were not in the house at the time.
Same. I mean, and even if this was somehow connected to spontaneous human combustion, those cases usually leave something behind: a leg, an arm. This left absolutely nothing. So yeah, in light of that, I don't think they were there either. I don't know how they got out. I don't know who took them. I don't know where they ended up, but I don't think they were in the house, which is not the conclusion I expected to draw when I first went into this.
It's a tough one, man.
Yeah.
I just can't. I don't know. I can't. You do make a compelling argument. There should have been more evidence in the house. if they were there and it burned. I just can't see how they would have been kidnapped like successfully from the
I mean,
house. Like it's just odd to me. Like when I first started watching this documentary, I'm thinking like, here's what probably happened. The older sister fell asleep on the couch, and one of the five kids was like, "Hey, let's go play this random game in the yard." And like
I was just gonna suggest
they
something like
left the
that.
house, but then like the rest of it doesn't really make sense. And I also, unless somebody like kidnapped them and killed them, but then again, why would you do that? What's your motivation if you're not trying to get a ransom or like let people know that you're making a statement or something? But I just can't picture five kids independently that would have grown up without one of them saying something.
mhm.
Because they weren't that
Mm,
young either. I mean,
right.
what are the
Yeah,
ages here?
it
We're
wasn't
going
like they were
from,
young enough that they could have been like not have memories of their family
yes,
and have been
5 to 14. So
told that they were always part of this other family. It wasn't
it's
that kind of situation.
Right. There is one thing we haven't touched on is that maybe we mentioned it was like a volunteer fire department that eventually showed up and whatnot. So there is the possibility that these guys just did a really crappy search. Like they might have poked through the rubble with rakes or something just to like
Mm,
to give it a cursory once over, but maybe they didn't know what they were doing, what they were looking for.
that seems a
Maybe
fair
they're
point. Yeah.
yeah, and I know there was that search, the excavation that happened later,
yeah.
but I don't know. It's never what's that quote? Never attribute to malice what can be explained with stupidity. So I mean, maybe these guys just really didn't know what they were doing and they missed stuff that was there. It's speculation, but it's not impossible.
All
Yeah.
right. Let's do this. So we always got to do a rating. So we're gonna do a spectrum scale tonight with 10 being they were kidnapped and 1 being they died in the fire. You got to put yourself along the spectrum somewhere as far as what you think. 10 kidnapped, 1 fire.
Okay, I'll take points on this one. I guess on that scale, I would fall at about a 7. I mean, I think I've come to the conclusion they weren't in the house, but I don't know if that necessarily means they were kidnapped. And if they were, I don't know how it was accomplished during the span of time that we're working with here without anyone noticing. Uh, but whether that means that that's the thing. I don't know what happened to them. No one does really, but I don't think they were in the house because after all of the combing through, even if the first pass was really shoddy, really inept, it seems like they would have found something. And with the attempt of passing off a bit of beef liver as a heart, it really seems like it's trying to throw the family off the case and say, no, look, your kids really are dead.
That's true too.
And why
Damn
would
it.
anyone do that if they
Mhm.
didn't have reason to try and misdirect? It just that is the weirdest part of this case, and that's what I keep coming back to. There was an attempt to make the family believe that they died in the fire. That attempt would not be necessary unless there was some sort of foul play involved. But I don't know how it was accomplished. But I firmly believe they weren't in the house when it burned.
So what was your
Uh,
number? Sorry, what'd you say?
7.
7. Okay.
Not 100% sure it was kidnapping, but they weren't there. That is what I'm going with.
Okay.
yeah, I'm in a pretty similar vein. I probably, I guess because I don't believe it was kidnapping necessarily. Um, I probably would fall like around 6, but it yeah, I don't believe that they're in the house. In part as well because at least the older brothers, and whether or not the parents did or not themselves, people they went trying to like get the rest of the kids out of the house, and it just it seems unbelievable that if these kids were in the house, that you would not have seen any sign of them in any fashion. Like you didn't see them like at windows, like trying to get out their window or something, or You didn't like hear them screaming like help, save me, or like there was no response when people called out to them. And it 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 really does seem like they just were not there. How that happened, um I don't have any light on that, but I would say they're they weren't in the house. Wasn't necessarily kidnapping, so I'm going to go with 6.
I never saw it presented as a theory, but another thought I had watching all of this stuff was like, if you threw suspicion on anybody in the family itself, like those 2 older brothers, for example, like maybe they killed the other 5 kids before they came downstairs. Um, or maybe they told their dad they were real tired that night and they were gonna go to sleep, but they didn't go to sleep. I mean, or George himself had a couple chances here that he could have been involved with something as well. But I'm just trying to think of why that would be the case. Like George is like, man, there's a lot of mouths to feed. We need to get rid of this as quick as we can. But then if that was the case, if anybody was involved in it, then like the family carried on looking for these people to too much of a degree that I think that you wouldn't have just kept that up for appearances for that long.
Yeah, that's a very long con if that's the case.
Yeah, I did have a little bit of suspicion on the father as well, but exactly like you say, that's the kind of thing I would assume that someone in that situation would yeah, like try and put on a show for 5-10 years maybe, and then be like, okay, I'm done, I've give up, you know. they're just gone dead. They were in the fire. This guy like kept searching or doing things for like the rest of his life, which was 35 years or something.
Yeah.
He died in, what was it, 67, I think?
He was 60.
Oh, yeah, sorry. The
69.
wife lived to like 89 or something.
Yeah.
That's right. So yeah.
But still
like 20 some years.
Yeah.
So yeah, in that regard, I kind of don't put a lot of suspicion on the father.
I was just curious too. Another weird theory in my head as I was watching this again was I didn't find enough about, nor did I, be honest, did I look enough for, but like the brother who couldn't make it, Joe, like if he was like fucked up in the head from war or something and actually had made it home that night and maybe was like, oh, you're all just living your perfect, healthy little life without me here, and hand grenade on the roof, hand grenade on the roof. There we go. I mean, that's ties together a couple of things at least.
Sadly, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. More so than it should.
But I just didn't see anything on him, and I don't know what happened to him afterwards either. Like, so. But that's an interesting theory. I'm gonna go a low number on this one. I think I'm probably gonna go like maybe like a 3. For my explanation here. I just don't know that those kids did make it out. Maybe they couldn't be found just because they had shoddy searches for them. Maybe they didn't make it out because, much like our episode on spontaneous human combustion, there's just weird properties of fire that happen certain times that we don't know about, although this is 5 people, so that seems a little less likely. Yeah. But I don't know. And then I was just thinking here too, the way I guess I would explain away the police chief like burying the crap in the basement might honestly be that like maybe that guy was like, this family will literally not stop looking for something that doesn't exist. So I'm just going to put anything down there that they can find anything from to be like, here's your children. They're in this somewhere. Because if they truly had burned and there was nothing left to present to the parents, then maybe the police chief or the fire chief's just like, they're never going to stop. They're going to spend the next 50 years of their life looking for these kids that burned up today. And maybe that was his effort to do that. I don't know. There's a lot of weird tangentials in this case for sure.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting one for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of like you said, more to this than I would have guessed. So, okay. Anybody got anything else on the Sodder Children tonight?
No, I see why this is a mystery that's held people's attention for close to 80 years now. It seems so easily explicable on the surface. Horrible tragedy, house fire, kids died. But you go just a little deeper, and all of a sudden there's all this
Yeah.
weird stuff that just fans out, and um, it's just a wild case. One that I'm still surprised I hadn't heard of, and I thank you for bringing it to my attention because this has been some interesting research.
It did make me kind of wonder too, like, if you really broke down house fires where people perished, like similar instances, would you be able to come up with the overall case, like this, where you're like, oh, this person had beef with the family and this person was on the
Mhm.
scene, and probably not to this extent, but it does make me kind of pause and question things a little bit more, and that's for sure.
Yeah.
Whew, boy. Well, not a cheerful one for Christmas here for us, if friends occasionally not disagreeing, but certainly an interesting one. Maybe, if nothing else, a chance for everybody to hug their family just a little bit closer this Christmas and be thankful that they're here with you
Yeah.
instead of disappeared, who knows where. But as we leave today, we're going to give Justin 20 seconds today to answer this scenario. Justin, you're at your family's house on Christmas Day and you're opening a present addressed to you from your uncle. You open
Okay.
it up and inside you find a vibrator and go.
Well, I would think that my uncle, being a fairly progressive sort, is just trying to make sure that I am keeping up a healthy and happy marriage. And knowing that my wife and I work different schedules and whatnot, she wants to make sure that, she's got something to, make her happy when I'm not around.
That's great, but what happens when your uncle was like, "Oh, I wasn't supposed to give that to you, wrong name on the box," but then you look at your aunt and she winks at you?
I would slam back an eggnog cocktail, close my eyes, and push the box over to her, pretending that the whole thing never happened.
Very good. All right. Well, there we go, everybody. Merry Christmas to you and all yours from all of us here at the Fawn Pod, the Fawncast. This has been Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing. Merry Christmas and goodbye, everyone.
Yep.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Microwave Massacre.